The wind across Laramie County did not just blow, it screamed. It was late October of 1888 in the high plains of Wyoming. The sky had turned the color of a bruised plum by noon. Clara Thorne stood at her cabin window and watched the horizon disappear. She was 29 years old. She had been a widow for exactly 14 months. Her husband, Thomas, had been taken by the Great Die-Up of 1887. That brutal winter had changed the West forever. It had killed millions of cattle across the plains. Then it had killed him. He died of a broken heart and a frozen pair of lungs while trying to save a single shivering calf. Now Clara lived alone on the jagged edge of the wilderness. She wore a heavy blue wool dress. Around her shoulders was a red knitted shawl. Thomas had bought it for her in Cheyenne during their first year of marriage. The shawl was the only thing that still smelled like him. It smelled of cedar, tobacco, and the promise of a future that never came. She watched the white wall of the blizzard move closer to her porch. The frontier did not forgive weakness. And that afternoon, it seemed determined to take one more life. Suddenly, she saw a shape in the swirling white. It was a horse. Its head was bowed low. It was staggering against the gale. On its back sat a man who looked more like a ghost than a human. He was slumped over the saddle horn. His hands were frozen to the reins. Clara did not hesitate. She did not think about the danger. She grabbed her heavy coat. She stepped into the freezing bite of the storm. The air was so cold it felt like needles in her throat. The wind tried to knock her down. She reached the gate just as the horse collapsed. The animal let out a weak, rattling breath. The man tumbled into the deep white drift. "Hey!" Clara shouted. The wind tore the word from her lips and scattered it into the gray. She grabbed the man's collar. She pulled with every ounce of strength she had left. He was too heavy for her. For one terrible moment, she thought she would lose him to the snow. Then his eyes opened halfway. With a broken groan, he pushed one boot against the frozen ground. Clara pulled. He crawled. Together, inch by inch, they moved toward the flickering light of her kitchen window. The horse whinnied once and tried to stand. Its legs trembled beneath it. It was not dead yet, but the storm was trying hard to finish the job. Clara managed to get the man onto her porch. She hauled him through the heavy oak door. She slammed it shut. She dropped the iron bar into place. The silence of the house felt heavy. The roar of the Wyoming wind was muffled now. The man lay on her braided rug. He was shivering violently. His coat was tattered. It was caked in a thick shell of ice. His face was hidden behind a dark, matted beard. He looked to be in his late 30s. His hair was black, but silver had begun to touch the edges. Even half frozen, he had the rugged look of a man shaped by long roads, hard work, and weather. The beard was frosted with snow and frozen breath. Clara hauled him toward the hearth. The fire was still glowing deep orange. She stripped off his frozen gloves. She pulled off his heavy, waterlogged boots. His feet were white. They were deathly numb. "Don't die on me, stranger," she whispered. Her voice was cracked from months of silence. "I've had enough death in this house. I've seen enough souls leave through this door." This was not a story about chasing danger. It was a story about mercy, in a place where mercy was often the only thing keeping people alive. She heated a pot of thin broth. She wrapped him in every quilt she owned. She used the heavy wool blankets Thomas had cherished. For 3 hours, she did not stop. She rubbed his hands. She rubbed his feet. She felt the grit of the trail on his skin. She watched the color slowly return to his weathered face. He was a cowboy. She could tell by the thick calluses on his palms. He was probably a drifter looking for work after the fall roundup. The Great Die-Up had left many men like him homeless. The cattle kings were bankrupt. The dream of the open range was dying. By midnight, his eyes flickered open. They were a deep, piercing gray. They looked like the granite of the Tetons after a rain. "Where am I?" he rasped. His voice sounded like grinding stones. "You're at the Thorn Ranch," she said. "Or what's left of it." "My horse," he choked out. Clara looked at the door. She felt a sharp pang of guilt in her chest. "I'll go for the horse," she said. She knew the answer, but she couldn't tell him yet. She went back into the storm with a flickering lantern. The wind nearly blinded her. She found the horse. It was still alive, but barely. She led the poor, shaking beast into the small barn. She gave it the last of her good, sweet hay. She rubbed its wet coat until her own arms ached. When she returned to the cabin, the man was sitting up. He was leaning against the stone fireplace. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. "I'm Silas Vance." "I'm Clara," she replied. She sat across from him. She pulled the red shawl tight around her shoulders. "The pass is closed, Silas. The weatherman in Cheyenne said this was a big one." "A historic one. You'll stay till the snow clears," she told him. "There's no other way out. The coulees will be filled 10 feet deep by morning." Silas looked at the window. The white dark pressed hard against the glass. "I didn't mean to be a burden," he said softly. "I was just heading south for the winter." Clara looked at her empty house. She looked at the lonely shadows dancing on the wall. "Maybe you're not a burden," she said. The first week was filled with the quiet, heavy awkwardness. The house was small. It consisted of only 2 rooms and a sleeping loft. Clara gave Silas her bed. She slept in the loft above the kitchen. He protested with the dignity of a man who had always looked after himself, but she was firm. "You're a guest until the road opens," she told him. "In this country, we take care of our own." Silas was a man of few words. He was typical of the men who rode the long trails. He spent his days mending the things Thomas had left behind. He was a man who couldn't stand to be idle. He fixed the loose leg on the kitchen table. He sharpened her dull axes until they could shave hair. He cleaned the thick soot from the chimney. He was a man who moved with a quiet, deliberate grace. Clara found herself watching him. She watched him from the corner of her eye while she kneaded bread. It had been a long time since a man's voice had echoed in these walls. It had been even longer since the house felt safe. The storm did not let up. The snow piled higher and higher. It reached the eaves of the roof. They were buried alive in a world of white and wood. To pass the long, frozen nights, Clara took out Thomas's old books. She read aloud to Silas by the yellow light of the kerosene lamp. She read him stories of the Oregon Trail. She read about the gold rushes and the building of the rails. He listened with a focus that moved her. He watched her lips as she spoke the words. One night, she noticed him looking at a portrait on the mantel. It was a photograph of Clara and Thomas. It was taken on their wedding day in 1884. They looked so young. They looked so full of hope. "He was a good man?" Silas asked. "The best," Clara said. Her voice caught in her throat like a burr. "He wanted to build an empire here. He wanted to see our brand on 10,000 head of cattle. But Wyoming is a hard kingdom to rule." Silas nodded slowly. He stared into the embers of the fire. "I lost my folks to the cholera in '66, he said. "I've been drifting since I was 12. I've seen the sun rise over every territory in the West, but I never had a place to call my own. I never had a portrait on a mantel." The loneliness in his voice made Clara's heart ache. It was a deep, ancient kind of loneliness. She reached out. Then she stopped. For 14 months, she had told herself that loving Thomas meant never needing anyone again. But grief was not the same as loyalty, and loneliness was not a promise she had to keep forever. She touched his hand for the first time. His skin was rough, like the bark of an old oak, but his touch was gentle. They sat there for a long time, 2 souls stranded by fate, Two people forgotten by the rest of the world. The second week brought the first real test of their survival. The woodpile in the kitchen was running low. The blizzard had stopped its screaming, but the temperature had plummeted. The mercury had dropped to 40 below zero. In that kind of cold, breath turns to ice before it hits the ground. Silas knew he had to get to the woodshed. If he didn't, they would freeze in their sleep. He tied a heavy hemp rope around his waist. He gave the other end to Clara. "If I don't come back in 10 minutes, you pull," he said. "Don't come out after me. Promise me, Clara." He stepped out into a world that was nothing but blinding white death. Clara stood by the door. The rope bit into her calloused palms. She prayed a prayer she hadn't said in over a year. She realized in that moment that she didn't want to be alone again. The silence of the house without his presence was terrifying. It was more frightening than the storm itself. Minutes ticked by like hours. The rope remained slack. Then, finally, it jerked. Silas appeared through the fog of his own frozen breath. He was hauling a sled of heavy pine logs. He was covered in thick frost. His eyelashes were white with ice. He looked like a statue carved from the winter itself. Clara pulled him inside. She fell into him. She hugged him with a desperate relief. He froze for a moment. He was a man unused to the touch of a woman. Then his arms came around her. They were strong. They were protective. He smelled of pine, winter, and sheer strength. "I'm here, Clara," he whispered into her hair. "I'm right here." That night, they sat closer to the fire than ever before. The boundaries between stranger and friend were melting. The ice around Clara's heart was beginning to crack. But the world outside was still watching. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe and leave a comment below. Would you open your door to a stranger in a deadly storm? Now, back to the Thorn Ranch. By December, the snow was 10 feet deep. The community of Laramie was miles away, but news in the West traveled in strange, cruel ways. A neighbor, a man named Hiram Black, managed to reach the cabin on snowshoes after following the fence line for hours. Hiram was a bitter man. He had wanted to buy Clara's land since the day Thomas died. He wanted her water rights for his own dwindling herd. He was a man who saw the world in terms of profit and loss. He did not understand mercy. When he saw Silas sitting at the kitchen table, his face twisted into a sneer. "Who is this, Clara?" Hiram demanded. He didn't remove his hat. "This is Silas Vance," she said firmly. "He's been helping me survive the winter. He saved my life, and I saved his." Hiram looked at Silas's worn coat and his trail-hardened hands. "It doesn't look right," Hiram said. "A widow woman and a drifter alone all winter. People are talking in town, Clara. They say you've forgotten your husband's memory pretty fast. They say you've traded your virtue for a pair of helping hands." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at the photograph of Thomas. She felt a wave of shame wash over her. Silas stood up. His height seemed to fill the entire room. His presence was overwhelming. "Mr. Black, I suggest you leave," Silas said. His voice was like the low rumble of a coming landslide. "The lady has done nothing but save a man's life. She has more honor in her little finger than you have in your whole body. If your mind is in the gutter, that's your burden to carry." Hiram looked at Silas's holstered pistol. He saw the look in the man's gray eyes. He backed away toward the door. "This isn't over, Clara," Hiram spat. "The law will have something to say about your reputation. A woman with a ruined name does not keep land for long, not when the bank is already looking for a reason to take it. And the bank will have something to say about your mortgage." When Hiram left, the silence in the cabin was cold. It was a different kind of cold than the wind outside. Clara sat at the table. She buried her face in her hands. "Maybe he's right," she sobbed. "Maybe I'm a disgrace to Thomas. Maybe I should have stayed alone in the dark." Silas knelt beside her on the rough floorboards. "You are the bravest woman I've ever known," he said. "You didn't ask for the storm." And you didn't ask for me to fall at your gate. But don't let a man like that take your peace. A woman's dignity isn't held in the gossip of fools. It's held in her heart. Clara looked at him. Tears were streaming down her weathered cheeks. It's so hard to be alone, Silas. Everyone wants something from me. The bank wants the land for the railroad. Hiram wants the water for his cattle. I'm just a piece of property to them. Silas took her hands in his. He squeezed them tight. To me, you're the person who kept the fire burning when the world went dark. You're the person who gave a dying man a second chance. That night, the weight of their situation felt heavy. In the late 1800s, a woman's reputation was her only currency. Without it, she was often treated as nothing in the eyes of society. This part of the story reflects the harsh judgment women often faced in that era. It does not excuse that cruelty. It only shows the weight Clara had to survive. But in the heart of a Wyoming winter, reputation didn't keep you warm. Love did. Human connection did. Christmas came and went with a simple meal. They ate salt pork and dried beans, but it felt like a feast. Silas had spent weeks carving something in secret. He handed her a small bird made of cedar wood. It was a meadowlark. The bird of the Wyoming plains. Clara had mended his coat. She had added a soft lining of rabbit fur she had trapped herself. They didn't need many words anymore. They moved in a perfect rhythm. They shared the chores. They shared long, lingering glances across the fire. As January turned to February, another brutal plains blizzard hit the territory. It was not the first deadly storm Wyoming had seen, and it would not be the last. But to Clara and Silas, it felt like the whole world had come to test them one final time. The wind shook the very foundations of the cabin. The logs groaned under the pressure. A massive branch from the old cottonwood tree snapped. It crashed through the roof of the barn. Silas rushed out into the white madness. He had to save the horses and Clara's last milk cow. He was gone for an hour. Then two. Clara paced the floor. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She realized then the truth she had been hiding from herself. She didn't just appreciate Silas. She loved him. She loved the way he hummed low in his throat when he worked. She loved the way he respected her silence and her grief. She loved that he never tried to take Thomas's place. Instead, he had carved his own place in the corners of her life. When he finally returned, he was limping. His sleeve was torn. A flying piece of timber had struck his arm and opened a shallow cut. Clara tended to the wound with trembling fingers. She washed the blood away with warm water. "You could have been killed," she whispered. "I almost lost you." "The animals are safe," he said. He was breathless and pale. "That's all that matters for the ranch." "No," she said. She looked him directly in the eye. "You are what matters. The land can go to the wind, Silas, but I cannot lose you." He leaned forward then. He kissed her. It was a kiss of salt, iron, and desperate hope. It was a promise made in the middle of a frozen wasteland. It was a vow that didn't need a priest. March arrived with a hint of a thaw. The eaves began to drip during the heat of the day. The brown, sleeping earth began to peek through the white shroud. The roads would soon be passable. The stagecoach from Cheyenne would soon run again, and Silas Vance would have no reason to stay. The "till the snow clears" agreement was coming to an end. Clara watched him from the porch. He was chopping the last of the winter wood. He looked stronger than the day he had collapsed in the drift. He looked like a man who belonged to this soil, but he also looked like a man preparing to move on. He had started cleaning his saddle. He had spent extra time grooming his horse. Clara felt a panic she couldn't describe. The thought of the empty chair at the table was unbearable. The thought of the silence returning was a death sentence. One evening, Silas sat on the porch steps. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold over the mountains. "The mud is drying," he said quietly. "The creeks are rising. I reckon I'll head south toward Colorado tomorrow."
"There's work in the mines, or the big ranches down there." Clara stood behind him. Her hand rested on the rough wood of the doorframe. "You don't have to go, Silas." He didn't turn around. He kept his gaze on the horizon. "I'm a drifter, Clara. I've got nothing to offer a woman like you. This house is Thomas's legacy. It's his sweat and his dreams."
"I'm just a man who got caught in a storm. And when spring comes, men like me are supposed to move on. That is the only life I have ever known. I do not know how to be wanted, Clara. I only know how to leave before someone asks me to. I'm a ghost passing through." Clara stepped down onto the dirt. She stood in front of him. She was wearing the blue dress and the red shawl. She looked like the spirit of the frontier itself.
She looked like resilience. "Thomas would want me to be happy," she said. "He loved this land, but he loved me more. And the land is too big for one person, Silas. It's too big and it's too lonely for a single soul. I don't want a legacy of stone and wood. I want a life." Silas looked up at her. His gray eyes were full of a terrible, beautiful pain.
"What are you saying, Clara?"
"I'm saying the snow has cleared," she whispered. "The roads are open. But I'm asking you to stay, not because you're stranded, not because you're a guest, but because I want this to be your home now. Stay because I can't imagine a morning without your boots on the floor. Stay because I love you." Silas stood up slowly. He looked at the small cabin. He looked at the vast golden plains stretching toward eternity. He looked at the woman who had saved his life. She had given him a reason to keep living it. "You'd have a drifter for a husband?" he asked. "A man with no name and no gold?" "I'd have Silas Vance," she replied. "A man who stays when the wind screams. A man who mends what is broken." He took her in his arms. He held her as the first spring breeze blew across the porch. It was a warm wind. It carried the scent of new grass and hope. "I'll stay," he said. "I'll stay as long as the grass grows and the water runs." They were married in April. A traveling preacher performed the ceremony under the cottonwood tree. Hiram Black and the gossips of Laramie watched from the road. They saw a couple who didn't care about the whispers. They saw two people who had survived the worst the world could throw at them. Clara kept the red shawl. She wore it on the day their first son was born. She wore it when they bought their first 100 head of cattle. After the wedding, folks began calling it the Thorn Vance Ranch. The Thorn Vance Ranch became a legend in Wyoming. It was known as a place of refuge. It was a place where the door was always open for a stranger in a storm. Because Clara and Silas never forgot the cold. They knew that sometimes the greatest blessings come in the middle of a blizzard. They knew that a broken wheel or a closed pass is often fate's way of guiding you home. The frontier was a place of high peaks and deep, dark valleys. But for them, it was the place where they found the truth. The truth is that no one is meant to walk the wilderness alone. They lived there side by side for 40 years. They lived there until the snow cleared for the very last time. Thank you for joining us for this journey into the heart of the Old West. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell us in the comments, do you believe some storms bring us exactly where we need to be? In our next story, we will follow the mysterious disappearance of a pioneer family in the Black Hills. Until then, keep your fires burning bright. Keep your hearts open to the strangers at your gate. God bless the frontier.